Imagine standing at the edge of a vast, crumbling ruin, stone walls that once echoed with life, now silent, streets that bustled with activity, now empty. The people who built these incredible cities, who shaped their worlds with skill and vision, vanished without a trace. No final battle, no mass exodus, no clear explanation. They were simply gone, and what they left behind are questions that have haunted historians, archaeologists, and explorers for centuries. Some of the greatest civilizations the world has ever known disappeared into thin air, leaving behind only whispers of their existence. These aren't just stories of decline or conquest, they're mysteries so deep, so baffling, that even today, with all our technology and knowledge, we still can't fully unravel them. Think about that for a moment. An entire society, thousands, sometimes millions of people vanishing without a clear reason. No records of their final days, no evidence of where they went. Just abandoned cities, half-finished monuments, and artifacts frozen in time. What could have happened? Was it a natural disaster so catastrophic it wiped them out overnight? A slow, creeping decline that went unnoticed until it was too late, or something even more inexplicable? These disappearances aren't just footnotes in history, they're gaping holes in our understanding of the human story. And the deeper you dig, the stranger it gets. That's what we're diving into today. From the sudden collapse of the mighty Maya to the eerie silence of the Indus Valley, from the island civilization of Rapa Nui to the desert enigma of the Nabateans, we'll explore 30 of the most spine-chilling, mind-bending disappearances of ancient cultures. Some of these stories will sound like something out of a legend, but they're real. And by the end, you'll see why these mysteries still captivate us, why they refuse to be solved, and what they might tell us about the fragile threads that hold even the greatest civilizations together. So if you're ready to step into the shadows of history and uncover secrets lost to time, let's begin. One of the most perplexing vanishings in human history belongs to the Indus Valley Civilization, a society so advanced it rivaled ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia at its peak. Flourishing around 2600 BC in what's now Pakistan and northwest India, this culture built sprawling, meticulously planned cities with grid-like streets, advanced drainage systems, and even indoor plumbing innovations that wouldn't become common elsewhere for thousands of years. Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, their greatest urban centers, were marvels of engineering, bustling with trade, art, and a writing system we still can't fully decipher. Yet by 1900 BC, these thriving metropolises were abandoned, their streets emptied, their secrets buried under layers of silence. What could topple such a sophisticated society? The clues left behind only deepen the mystery. Unlike other ancient collapses, there's no evidence of massive wars, no burned palaces, no mass graves filled with weapons. Some scholars point to climate change, noting shifts in monsoon patterns that may have turned fertile farmlands into dust, starving the population. Others suggest the mighty Indus River, their lifeblood, suddenly changed course, disrupting trade and agriculture. Then there's the controversial Aryan invasion theory, the idea that nomadic warriors swept in from the north, overpowering the cities. But even this is hotly debated with little archaeological proof. Perhaps most eerie of all is the civilization's own cryptic farewell. Their undeciphered script, etched into seals and tablets, offers no answers, no royal decrees, no panicked last words, just symbols staring back at us across millennia. Even their decline seems strange. Instead of a sudden catastrophe, the cities show signs of slow unraveling, like a civilization quietly fading away. Were they undone by their own success? Did overcrowding or disease play a role? Or was it something we haven't even considered? The Indus Valley people left us a puzzle with half the pieces missing. A reminder that even the mightiest empires can vanish into the shadows of time without leaving us the full story. High on the cliffs of Crete, overlooking the sparkling Aegean Sea, stood the grand palaces of the Minoans, a civilization so vibrant, so ahead of its time, that their art, architecture, and maritime prowess still dazzle us today. Around 2000 BC, while much of Europe was still in the Stone Age, the Minoans built labyrinthine complexes like Knossos with colorful frescoes depicting leaping dolphins and lithe bull dancers, advanced plumbing systems, and a vast trade network stretching from Egypt to the Levant. They were the undisputed masters of the ancient Mediterranean, a culture of peace and prosperity with no trace of fortifications or war, until suddenly they weren't. By 1450 BC, their palaces lay in ruins, their cities abandoned, and their voices silenced. What brought down this glittering society? The most dramatic suspect is the cataclysmic eruption of Thera, modern-day Santorini, a volcanic blast so powerful it may have been 10 times stronger than Krakatoa. Around 1600 BC, the island virtually exploded, sending tsunamis racing toward Crete just 70 miles away. Ash blotted out the sun for years, crippling agriculture, while towering waves obliterated coastal settlements. Archaeologists have found Minoan buildings on Crete smashed by enormous boulders, hurled inland by the force of the water. Yet this disaster alone doesn't fully explain their disappearance. The Minoans survived the initial catastrophe, clinging on for another century and a half before finally fading. So what finally finished them? Some point to the rise of the Mycenaeans, warlike Greeks from the mainland who may have exploited the Minoans' weakened state. Knossos shows signs of Mycenaean occupation near its end, with charred rubble hinting at conflict. Others argue internal decay, overpopulation, resource shortages, or even a revolt against the priestly elite. But the most haunting clue lies in their undeciphered script, Linear A. Unlike later Linear B, adapted by the Mycenaeans to write Greek, Linear A's symbols remain mute. Were they prayers for deliverance, desperate inventories of dwindling supplies? We may never know. The Minoans' legacy is a riddle wrapped in beauty, their artistry immortal, their ending ambiguous. Unlike the Indus Valley's slow decline, theirs was a staggered collapse, a civilization surviving disaster only to succumb to something subtler. Perhaps that's the true lesson. Even the most advanced societies are fragile, balanced between the caprices of nature and the ambitions of humanity. Their painted dolphins still leap across time, vibrant and eternal, while the whispers of their fall remind us how quickly brilliance can flicker out. Long before the Maya built their towering pyramids or the Aztecs ruled from Tenochtitlan, another civilization laid the foundation for Mesoamerican culture, the Olmecs. Thriving along the humid Gulf Coast of Mexico as early as 1200 BCE, they are often called the mother culture of the region, pioneering artistic styles, religious symbols, and even the ball game that would echo through later societies. Their influence was so profound that even centuries after their decline, other civilizations imitated their jaguar gods and serpent motifs. Yet by around 400 BC, their great ceremonial centers like La Venta and San Lorenzo were abandoned, their colossal stone heads, some weighing over 20 tons, left staring silently into the jungle. How does a culture so influential simply vanish? The Olmecs' most iconic legacy is their massive stone heads, carved from basalt and each bearing unique helmet-like crowns. These aren't just artistic feats, they're logistical marvels. The nearest source of basalt was 50 miles away, meaning the Olmecs transported these multi-ton blocks without wheels or draft animals, likely using rafts and sheer manpower. But the heads tell us something deeper. This was a society with centralized power, capable of marshalling vast resources for projects that served no obvious practical purpose. Were they portraits of rulers, deities? We don't know, because the Olmecs left no deciphered writing, only cryptic glyphs and symbols that hint at a complex belief system. So what disrupted this sophisticated society? One leading theory points to environmental catastrophe. Sediment cores from the region suggest severe droughts around the time of their decline, possibly exacerbated by deforestation. The Olmecs relied heavily on maize agriculture, and a prolonged dry spell could have triggered famine and social unrest. At La Venta, archaeologists found evidence of deliberate destruction: monuments toppled, altars defaced. Was this the work of invaders or something more unsettling? An internal revolt against the ruling elite? Then there's the volcanic angle. Nearby Cerro San Martin erupted around the same period, spewing ash that could have smothered crops and poisoned water supplies. Yet, unlike the Minoans, there's no clear layer of volcanic debris in Olmec cities, leaving the disaster's role debated. Some scholars propose a slower unraveling: resource depletion, shifting trade routes, or even a rejection of the rigid hierarchies that built the colossal heads. The Olmecs didn't so much disappear as dissolve. Their art and ideas lived on, absorbed by later cultures, but their cities sank back into the earth, reclaimed by vines and silence. Their absence feels deliberate, as if they chose to step off the stage of history, leaving behind only those enigmatic stone faces gazing eternally, as if waiting for us to understand. Rising from the fertile floodplains of the Mississippi River, Cahokia was a marvel of the ancient world, a bustling metropolis that, at its height around 1100 CE, dwarfed London in size. Over 120 earthen mounds, some as tall as 10-story buildings, dominated the skyline, while a sprawling central plaza pulsed with ceremonies, trade, and games. This wasn't just a village or a ceremonial center. It was a city in every sense, home to tens of thousands of people, with neighborhoods, workshops, and even astronomical observatories. Yet by 1400 CE, the streets emptied, the mounds fell quiet, and Cahokia became a ghost town, its abandonment as mysterious as its rise. How could a civilization so advanced vanish so completely? The scale of Cahokia still stuns archaeologists. Monk's Mound, the city's towering centerpiece, covers more ground than the Great Pyramid of Giza at its base, built entirely by hand, basketful of earth by basketful. Surrounding it, Woodhenge, a circular arrangement of wooden posts, functioned as a precise solar calendar, proving the Cahokians' deep understanding of the cosmos. Their trade network stretched from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico, exchanging copper, shells, and exotic goods, but perhaps most remarkable was their society's cohesion. Unlike the warlike Maya or the Imperial Romans, Cahokia shows little evidence of fortifications or large-scale violence, at least initially. So what changed? One prevailing theory points to environmental strain. Dendrochronology tree ring data reveals a series of brutal droughts in the 13th and 14th centuries, crippling the maize-based agriculture that fed Cahokia's population. Soil studies show signs of deforestation and erosion, suggesting the land was pushed beyond its limits. But was this just bad luck or something more? Some researchers argue the Cahokians' own success sowed the seeds of collapse. The city's rapid growth may have outpaced its ability to manage waste, leading to polluted waterways and disease. At the same time, evidence of palisades and burnt structures from later periods hints at growing social unrest. Were the ruling elites overthrown? Did factions turn on each other as resources dwindled? Then there's the haunting absence of written records. Unlike the Maya, the Cahokians left no decipherable texts, only symbolic art and enigmatic carvings. We don't know what they called themselves, their rulers, or even the city we now name after a later tribe that never lived there. The silence is deafening. By the time European explorers arrived centuries later, the mounds were already overgrown, their builders long dispersed into smaller, mobile communities. Some scholars suggest the Cahokians didn't so much vanish as adapt, abandoning urban life for a more sustainable existence. Others point to oral histories from descendant nations like the Osage and Quapaw, which speak of a great migration spurred by prophecy or disaster. The truth may lie in layers, not one catastrophic event, but a slow unraveling of social, environmental, and political threads. Cahokia's legacy lingers in the quiet hum of cicadas atop Monk's Mound today, a reminder that even the grandest civilizations are tethered to the land that sustains them. Its empty plazas echo a question we're still grappling with. How do we balance growth with survival? The mounds endure, silent sentinels of a lost world waiting for us to listen. Deep in the lush jungles of Cambodia, a city of gods once stood Angkor, the glittering heart of the Khmer Empire. At its peak in the 12th century, this was the largest pre-industrial city on Earth, a sprawling network of temples, canals, and reservoirs supporting nearly 1 million people. The crown jewel, Angkor Wat, stretched toward the heavens, its intricate bas-reliefs depicting cosmic battles and divine kingdoms. Yet by the 15th century, the Khmer elite abandoned their sacred capital, leaving it to the vines and strangler figs. What could force a civilization that mastered hydrology, art, and warfare to simply walk away from its greatest achievement? The most compelling clues lie in Angkor's own lifeblood water. The Khmer were engineering geniuses, constructing vast barrages, reservoirs, and canals to harness monsoon rains, turning unpredictable weather into agricultural abundance. But tree ring studies from Vietnam reveal a horrifying truth. The 14th and 15th centuries brought prolonged droughts, punctuated by devastating mega monsoons. The system designed to buffer against nature's whims became its victim. Canals silted up, reservoirs ran dry, then overflowed catastrophically. At Angkor's outskirts, archaeologists found evidence of hastily dug emergency channels, last-ditch efforts to reroute water as crops failed. Even the gods carved into temple walls couldn't halt the ecological unraveling. Yet climate alone doesn't explain the empire's retreat. Angkor's grandeur may have sown the seeds of its downfall. LiDAR scans reveal a sprawling urban footprint over 300 square miles, hinting at overpopulation. Soil analyses show deforestation and erosion, as every tree felled to build more temples disrupted the delicate water cycle further. Then came the Siamese. Manuscripts from Ayutthaya describe brutal raids in 1431, sacking Angkor's outer neighborhoods. The Khmer court, already weakened by famine and infighting, fled south to Phnom Penh, trading stone splendor for the strategic safety of river trade routes. But here's the twist: Angkor wasn't fully abandoned. Inscriptions suggest pilgrims and monks lingered for centuries, tending shrines amidst the ruins. The jungle didn't reclaim the city so much as embrace it, roots intertwining with carvings in a slow, green surrender. Modern archaeologists debate whether this was collapse or adaptation, a society choosing resilience over rigidity. The Khmer Empire didn't vanish, it transformed, leaving behind a haunting lesson. Even the mightiest cities are negotiations between human ambition and the environment's patience, between stone and rain. Angkor Wat still stands, not as a tomb, but as a testament to impermanence. Its reflection in the moat a mirror to our own fragile civilizations. The grand citadels of Mycenae and Turin once stood as unshakable symbols of power fortresses so mighty their walls were said to be built by giants. By 1300 BC, the Mycenaeans dominated the Aegean, their warrior kings presiding over a network of palace states rich with gold, art, and the earliest form of Greek writing. Yet within a century, fire consumed their great halls, their linear B script vanished, and Greece plunged into a dark age so profound that even the memory of these Bronze Age rulers faded into myth. What could bring down a civilization that inspired Homer's epics? The answer lies in a perfect storm of chaos that reshaped the ancient world. Start with the land itself. Pollen samples from Greek lake beds tell a grim story. Severe droughts gripped the region around 1200 BC, parching olive groves and wheat fields. At the same time, archaeological layers in Mycenaean cities show evidence of earthquakes, shattered walls, toppled columns, as if the earth itself revolted against them. But nature's wrath was only the beginning. Clay tablets from Pylos, baked hard by the fires that destroyed the palace, record frantic preparations for an unknown threat. One speaks of coastal watchers stationed to guard against the sea, hinting at an invasion force looming on the horizon. Enter the Sea Peoples, a confederation of marauders whose very name echoes through ancient texts like a nightmare. Egyptian inscriptions at Medinet Habu depict these enigmatic warriors in horned helmets, their ships prowling the Mediterranean like wolves. While their origins remain debated, were they displaced Sardinians? Anatolian mercenaries, their impact was undeniable. Mycenaean ports show layers of ash and hastily built fortifications. At Turin's, skeletons sprawl in streets, some with arrowheads embedded in bone. Yet the Sea Peoples weren't the sole destroyers. Some scholars argue they were as much victims as aggressors, fleeing their own collapsing homelands in a domino effect of famine and war. The Mycenaeans' own society may have sealed their fate. Their rigid, palace-centered economy relied on centralized control. When drought broke trade networks and raids disrupted copper imports for weapons, the system imploded. Tablets from Pylo's final days revealed desperate rationing of bronze to smiths, while others mention rowers being drafted, perhaps in a last stand against invaders. As palaces burned, survivors fled to remote hills, abandoning writing and monumental architecture for centuries. Greece's population plummeted by as much as 90%, leaving behind a whispered legacy in Homer's tales of Agamemnon's doomed house. Perhaps the most haunting clue comes from a single clay tablet preserved by chance in the Inferno at Pylos. It lists offerings to Poseidon and the two queens, a prayer for deliverance that went unanswered. The Mycenaeans didn't just fall, they were erased so thoroughly that later Greeks believed their massive ruins were the work of cyclopes. Their downfall wasn't one catastrophe, but many: quakes, invaders, climate, and a fragile system that couldn't bend without breaking. In their silence, they left a warning, one etched not in gold, but in the scorched earth of their once great halls. Perched high in the alcoves of Mesa Verde, the cliff dwellings of the ancestral Pueblones, often called the Anasazi, cling to sandstone walls like swallows' nests. These weren't just shelters, they were multi-story apartment complexes, granaries, and ceremonial spaces carved into the rock with astonishing precision. By 1200 CE, this civilization thrived across the Four Corners region, farming maize in arid lands and weaving intricate turquoise trade networks. Then, within a single generation around 1300 CE, they walked away, not just from one village but from entire regions, leaving behind pottery still stacked in corners, sandals tucked into crevices, even unopened stores of corn. The abandonment feels urgent, deliberate. What could drive a people to leave everything they'd built, vanishing into the deserts and mountains? The most tangible culprit is drought. Tree rings from ancient bristlecone pines tell a harrowing story. A 23-year megadrought gripped the southwest starting in 1276, the worst in 8 centuries. Springs dried up, terraced fields withered, and the delicate balance of life in the desert shattered. At Choco Canyon, once the ceremonial heart of their world, archaeologists found evidence of frantic well digging as water tables plummeted. But drought alone doesn't explain the eerie haste of their departure. Unlike Cahokia's slow unraveling, the ancestral Pueblones' exit feels like a coordinated retreat. Some sites show signs of deliberate closure, doorways sealed with stone, Kiva's ceremonial rooms burned in ritual fires. This wasn't chaos, it was ceremony. Which raises another possibility: conflict. Across the region, skeletons from the late 13th century bear the marks of violence, blunt force trauma, arrow wounds. At Castle Rock Pueblo, a mass grave holds the remains of dozens, some scalped. Did raids by Numic-speaking groups, ancestors of the Ute and Paiute, pressure the Pueblones to flee? Or was it internal strife? Petroglyphs near Mesa Verde depict clashing figures, their meaning debated. One chilling panel shows a tower set ablaze, warriors scaling ladders. A scene echoed in oral histories of Hopi and Zuni descendants who speak of a time when the people turned on each other. Yet the most haunting clues lie in the spiritual realm. Modern Pueblo elders describe migrations not as flights from danger, but as sacred obligations, a return to the Earth Mother's guidance. At places like Kayat Seal and Betatakin, archaeologists found prayer sticks and offerings carefully placed before abandonment, as if sealing a covenant with the land. Perhaps the drought wasn't just disaster, but divine instruction. The ancestral Puebloans didn't vanish, they transformed, dispersing into smaller communities along the Rio Grande and Hopi mesas, where their descendants still honor the old ways. The cliff dwellings stand empty now, sunlight filtering through collapsed roofs onto grinding stones left mid-task. Their silence speaks of resilience, not ruin. This wasn't an ending, but a reinvention, a people choosing survival on their own terms, carrying their culture not in stone, but in stories. When the Hopi say their ancestors emerged into this world through a sipapu, a sacred portal, they're remembering more than myth. They're honoring a journey that began when the rains failed and the cliffs echoed with footsteps, moving toward a future they couldn't yet see. Carved into the rose-red cliffs of Jordan, the city of Petra stands as a masterpiece of human ingenuity, a wonder so breathtaking that even today, visitors gasp at the sight of the treasury's facade gleaming in the desert sun. But the Nabateans, the nomadic traders who built this marvel, were more than just architects. They were the gatekeepers of the ancient world's wealth, controlling the incense routes that funneled frankincense and myrrh from Arabia to the Mediterranean. At their height around the 1st century BC, Petra thrived as a cosmopolitan hub, its water systems defying the arid landscape, its tombs and temples adorned with intricate carvings. Yet by the 4th century CE, the city was fading, its glory dimmed. What happened to the people who turned a desert gorge into a kingdom's crown jewel? The Romans may hold the first clue. In 106 CE, Emperor Trajan annexed Nabatea, absorbing it into the empire as the province of Arabia Petrea. At first, this seemed like a boon. Roman roads linked Petra to Damascus and the Red Sea, theoretically expanding trade. But the Nabateans lost something vital: autonomy. No longer the middlemen, they became just another outpost in Rome's vast machine. Taxes siphoned wealth away, and the empire's preference for sea routes over land caravans slowly choked Petra's lifeblood. A receipt from a Roman soldier stationed there complains about the endless sand and dwindling caravans, a stark contrast to earlier descriptions of the city's bustling markets. Yet Rome wasn't the only force at work. In 363 CE, a devastating earthquake rocked the region, toppling columns and crumbling aqueducts. Archaeologists found evidence of hasty repairs, columns propped up with rubble, pipes patched with lead, but the damage was profound. The Nabateans' genius had always been their ability to harness water, channeling flash floods through a network of dams and cisterns. When quakes shattered that system, the city's survival grew precarious. Yet even here, the story twists. Nearby cities like Gerasa flourished after the same quake, suggesting Petra's decline wasn't inevitable. Perhaps the fieriest clue lies in the desert itself. Core samples from the Dead Sea reveal a centuries-long drying trend, turning marginal farmland to dust. The Nabateans had once thrived by mastering this harsh environment, but as droughts intensified, even their ingenuity had limits. Meanwhile, new trade routes emerged, ships sailing directly from India to Roman Egypt, bypassing Arabia altogether. A Greek merchant's ledger from 400 CE lists spices arriving in Alexandria with no mention of Petra, a silent testament to its fading relevance. But the Nabateans didn't vanish. Unlike the abrupt abandonments of Mesa Verde or Cahokia, their dissipation was gradual. Some shifted north to Basra, others blended into Bedouin tribes. Their legacy lingers in the Arabic dialects of Jordan's deserts and the stubborn survival of their script, which evolved into modern Arabic's flowing letters. Petra itself never fully emptied. Byzantine churches rose amid the ruins, their frescoes whispering of continuity. The Nabateans' end wasn't a collapse but a metamorphosis, their brilliance absorbed into the tapestry of history. Standing in the narrow gorge that leads to Petra, you can almost hear the echoes of camel caravans and the clink of stonemasons' tools. The Nabateans' greatest monument isn't just the city they left behind, but the lesson it carries: civilizations don't always fall. Sometimes they simply change shape, like sandstone worn smooth by wind and time. The Toltecs ruled Mesoamerica like demigods. Their capital, Tolan, was a city of mythic splendor where artisans crafted feather serpent mosaics and towering warrior statues adorned with jade. By the 10th century, their influence stretched from central Mexico to the Yucatan, shaping the art, religion, and politics of future civilizations like the Aztecs. Yet by 1200 CE, Tolan lay in ruins, its legacy tangled between archaeological fact and Aztec legend. The question isn't just what destroyed them, but whether they ever existed as the Aztecs claimed, or if their downfall was rewritten by history's victors. Start with the archaeology. At Chala, the site most scholars identify as Tolan, the evidence paints a picture of sudden violence. The main pyramid's colossal Atlantean columns, warriors carved in basalt, were toppled deliberately, their fragments scattered as if in rage. Skeletal remains show signs of mass executions, with skulls bearing the marks of ritual decapitation. Yet there's no layer of ash from burning, no foreign arrowheads lodged in walls. This suggests no outside invader, but something more intimate, a rebellion perhaps, or a civil war between factions. The Aztecs, who revered the Toltecs as cultural ancestors, told of a moral collapse. Their king, Topoltzin-Quetzalcoatl, driven out by dark forces led by the sorcerer Tezcatlipoca. Was this allegory or thinly veiled history? The climate adds another layer. Sediment cores from nearby Lake Texcoco reveal a decades-long drought starting around 1150 CE, coinciding with Chala's abandonment. Starvation could have shattered the Toltecs' rigid social order, turning subjects against rulers who failed to appease the gods. But here's where legend and science clash. The Aztec accounts describe Tolan's fall as supernatural, a city cursed by hubris, where corn withered and temples crumbled because its people broke cosmic laws. Modern excavations, however, show a more mundane truth: overexploited farmland, exhausted resources, and a society that grew too large to sustain itself. Then there's the Chichimka puzzle. These nomadic tribes from the north were long blamed for sacking Chala, yet artifacts tell a different story. Chichimka arrowheads appear in Toltec ruins, but only after the city's collapse, like scavengers picking at a corpse. Some scholars argue the Toltecs weren't conquered at all, but simply dissolved, their elites dispersing to places like Chichen Itza, where Toltec-style murals suddenly appear in the 12th century. At the Temple of the Warriors, carvings depict battles eerily similar to Chala's, as if the Toltecs carried their strife with them. The truth may lie in the blending of two narratives. The Aztecs, writing centuries later, had every reason to glorify the Toltecs as fallen paragons, a cautionary tale about divine wrath and decay. Archaeology, though, suggests a slower unraveling, drought, infighting, and a migration that scattered their influence like seeds. Chala's ruins whisper of neither apocalypse nor conquest, but of a civilization that fragmented under its own weight, its legacy reshaped by those who came after. The Toltecs didn't vanish, they became ghosts, haunting the stories of every culture that tried to claim their mantle. Imagine a civilization so vast, its settlements stretched across present-day Romania, Moldova, and Ukraine, over 160,000 square miles of thriving villages, their houses arranged in concentric circles like some ancient cosmic blueprint. This was Cucuteni Tripilia, Europe's most expansive Neolithic society, a culture that flourished for over 2 millennia, crafting exquisite spiral-patterned pottery and living in harmony with the land. Yet around 2750 BC, something extraordinary happened. They began burning their own homes, not once but repeatedly, layer upon layer of ash revealing a pattern of deliberate destruction. Not by invaders, not by accident, but by their own hands. Why would a people torch everything they'd built only to rebuild and burn again? The scale of these fires defies simple explanation. At sites like Talyanki and Nebelivka, archaeologists have uncovered the remains of massive settlements, some housing up to 15,000 people systematically set ablaze. The charred timbers and collapsed walls show no signs of struggle or looting. In fact, the ruins often contain carefully placed artifacts, intact pottery, ritual figurines, even granaries still filled with grain. This wasn't panic, it was ceremony. Some researchers point to evidence of household closure rituals, burnt offerings of animals or symbolic objects suggesting the fires were part of a profound spiritual practice. Perhaps these people believed structures, like lives, had natural cycles and destruction was a form of rebirth. But there's another, darker possibility lurking in the soil. Pollen samples from the region reveal a shifting climate around the time of the burnings, with deciduous forests giving way to drier grasslands. Combined with evidence of overworked soil and dwindling game, it paints a picture of ecological stress. Did the Cucuteni Tripillions resort to controlled burns to replenish nutrient-depleted land, only to lose control? Or were the fires a desperate plea to unseen forces, a ritual sacrifice of their homes to stave off environmental collapse? The layers of ash tell conflicting stories. At some sites, settlements were rebuilt exactly atop their predecessors. At others, the fires marked a final exodus. The most haunting clue lies in what's missing. No mass graves, no fortifications, no evidence of warfare. This was a culture that, for all its sophistication, left no trace of kings, no temples to gods, just those mesmerizing spirals on their pottery, echoing the cycles they seemed to embrace. Their disappearance wasn't abrupt but gradual, like embers cooling. Some scholars believe they didn't vanish at all, but dispersed, their bloodline and traditions absorbed by the Yamnaya steppe herders whose migrations would reshape Europe. Standing in the shadow of a reconstructed Cucuteni Tripillia dwelling today, the air smells faintly of charred wheat, a ghostly reminder of choices we can't fully comprehend. Were the fires ecological necessity or sacred surrender? The answer may lie in both. In the end, these Neolithic visionaries left us a riddle written not in words but in flames, a civilization that mastered the art of living, only to perfect the art of letting go. High atop the Ethiopian plateau, the kingdom of Aksum once stood as one of the ancient world's great powers, a civilization so formidable it minted its own gold coins, traded with Rome and India, and erected towering obelisks that pierced the sky like stone fingers reaching for the divine. By the 4th century, its rulers had converted to Christianity, building monolithic churches and claiming descent from the biblical King Solomon himself. Yet by the 7th century, this African empire began to crumble, its influence waning until its grand cities slipped into silence. How could a kingdom that rivaled Byzantium and Persia simply fade from history? The answer lies in a web of shifting trade, environmental strain, and a world reordered by faith. First, the earth itself turned against Aksum. For centuries, the kingdom's wealth had been rooted in its fertile highlands, where terraced farms produced surplus grain to feed its people and fuel its trade. But soil samples tell a troubling story. Centuries of intensive plowing and deforestation led to catastrophic erosion, stripping away the very land that had made Aksum prosperous. Sediment cores from nearby lakes reveal layers of silt washed down from denuded hillsides, a silent testament to an agricultural collapse. At the same time, pollen records show a shift toward drought-resistant plants, hinting at worsening aridity. The kingdom's breadbasket was vanishing, and with it the tax base that supported its armies and monuments. Then came the winds of geopolitical change. The rise of Islam in the 7th century shattered Aksum's monopoly on Red Sea trade. Muslim caliphates expanding across Arabia and North Africa bypassed Aksum's ports in favor of new routes through the Persian Gulf. Coins found in Aksumite ruins tell the tale. Where once Roman and Indian currency flowed freely, later layers yield only sparse, locally minted pieces, a numismatic funeral dirge for a dying economy. Even Axum's legendary naval prowess, which had once allowed it to invade southern Arabia, became irrelevant in a world where power was measured in caravans, not ships. Yet the most haunting relics of Axum's decline are its obelisks, some standing, others fallen like giants slain in battle. The tallest, at 33 meters, was a marvel of engineering, carved from a single block of granite and transported miles without wheels or beasts of burden. These weren't just monuments, they were statements of divine kingship anchoring the cosmos to the earth. Their abandonment speaks volumes. Later stelae are smaller, cruder, as if the artisans who once shaped mountains had forgotten their own techniques. The last known Axumite coin, minted around 700 CE, bears the image of a king with no name, a ruler so diminished by time that even his identity was lost. But here's the twist: Axum never truly disappeared. Unlike the Maya or Cahokia, its people didn't vanish but adapted, their culture flowing into the medieval kingdom of Abyssinia. The Ark of the Covenant, said to reside in Axum's Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion, remains a potent symbol of continuity. Modern Ethiopians still speak Jez, the liturgical language of the Axumites, and their Orthodox Christianity preserves echoes of the Old Kingdom's rituals. The obelisks, now UNESCO treasures, stand as both memorial and mystery, silent witnesses to an empire that didn't so much fall as transform, its legacy written not in ruins but in the living heartbeat of a nation. Isolated in the vast Pacific, Rapa Nui Easter Island is a paradox carved in stone. Here, a society that erected nearly 900 moai, some weighing over 80 tons and standing 30 feet tall, somehow collapsed into a shadow of itself, leaving behind a ravaged landscape and haunting questions. How could a people capable of moving these colossal statues across miles without wheels or draft animals have brought ecological ruin upon themselves? The answer, it turns out, is as layered as the island's volcanic soil, tangled between environmental catastrophe and the brutal hand of history. Start with the moai. These towering figures weren't just art. They were conduits between the living and the ancestors, embodiments of mana or spiritual power. The sheer logistics of their construction boggled the mind. Quarried from Rono Roroku's volcanic tuff, transported upright, some scholars believe using a rocking motion, and then raised atop ceremonial platforms called ahu. The energy and organization required speak to a sophisticated society, one capable of marshalling vast labor for communal projects. Yet pollen samples from lakebed cores tell a darker story. Stratum by stratum, they reveal a terrifying deforestation event. The island's once lush palm forests, home to the tallest palms in the genus Jubea, vanished by the 17th century, replaced by grasslands and ferns. Without trees to anchor the soil, erosion set in, and without wood, the islanders couldn't build fishing canoes, cutting off a critical protein source. This is where the ecocide theory took root, the idea that the Rapa Nui people, blinded by short-term needs, chopped down every last tree in a tragic cycle of competition. Archaeologists found evidence of increased warfare during this period. Obsidian spear points called mata, cave refuges, and oral histories of clan violence. The moai themselves were toppled, many face down as if in punishment. But recent research complicates this narrative. Some scientists argue that Polynesian rats, introduced accidentally by settlers, played a bigger role than humans in the deforestation, gnawing through seeds and preventing regrowth. Others point to climate shifts. Drier conditions may have stressed the fragile ecosystem. Then came the Europeans. Dutch explorer Jacob Roggeveen's arrival in 1722 marked the beginning of the end. Within a century, disease, slave raids, and forced removals decimated the population. By 1877, a census counted just 111 Rapa Nui people left. The island's tragic arc mirrors other indigenous collapses, a society already weakened by environmental strain, then shattered by colonial violence. Yet here's the twist, the Rapa Nui didn't vanish. Their culture adapted. The Birdman cult, centered on the god Makemake, replaced Moai worship, and today's islanders still chant ancient songs, their language a living thread to the past. The lesson of Rapa Nui isn't just a cautionary tale about deforestation, it's a story of resilience. The Moai stare inland now, their backs to the sea, as if guarding secrets we're only beginning to understand. Their silent faces remind us that collapse is rarely a single event, but a chain of choices, accidents, and forces beyond any society's control. And perhaps most hauntingly, they ask us, if an entire civilization can vanish from one of the most remote places on Earth, what does that say about our own vulnerabilities? The Hittite Empire was a colossus of the Bronze Age straddling modern-day Turkey and Syria. Its chariots thundered across battlefields, its laws carved into clay tablets with meticulous precision. At its zenith, their capital Hattusa boasted towering walls and a library holding thousands of cuneiform texts, a testament to their bureaucratic brilliance. Yet around 1180 BC, this mighty empire crumbled with shocking speed, abandoning their great cities to fire and silence. What could topple a civilization that had withstood centuries of conflict? The answer lies in a deadly convergence of drought, rebellion, and an enigmatic force that haunted the ancient world, the Sea Peoples. First, the land itself turned against them. Tree rings from Anatolia tell a story of relentless drought in the late 12th century, parching the fields that fed Hattusa's massive grain stores. Clay tablets from the empire's final years speak of desperate rationing, one handful of grain per day, and pleas to the gods for rain that never came. Then came the famine refugees. A letter from the last Hittite king, Suppiluliuma II, describes waves of starving people flooding into the capital, straining resources beyond breaking. But hunger was only the prelude. At Hattusa's ruins, archaeologists found something chilling. The city's gates weren't breached by invaders, they were left open. Charred storage jars, still filled with precious grain, suggest a panicked evacuation rather than a siege. It's as if the Hittites simply walked away from their own heartland. Enter the Sea Peoples, the shadowy marauders who seem to appear at the collapse of every great Bronze Age power. Egyptian reliefs at Medinet Habu depict these warriors in feathered helmets, their ships prowling the coastline like wolves. While their origins remain debated, their impact on the Hittites is etched in fire. At coastal cities like Ugarit, a frantic letter to the Hittite king was found still in its kiln, unsent. The enemy's ships are here, our crops are burning. But here's the twist, the Sea Peoples may not have been the sole destroyers. Some Hittite vassal states, like Tahantasa, show signs of rebellion, their rulers seizing the chaos to declare independence. Tablets from Amar describe local militias looting Hittite administrative buildings while the empire's back was turned. The final blow came from within. The Hittite Empire was always a patchwork of semi-independent states held together by royal marriages and military might. As drought withered their granaries and the Sea Peoples severed their Mediterranean trade routes, this fragile unity shattered. Vassals stopped sending troops, rival princes fought over the crumbling throne. In Hattusa's ruins, the last royal seals were pressed not into clay but into hastily made wax, a small detail telling of a bureaucracy in freefall. Yet the Hittites didn't vanish entirely. Smaller Neo-Hittite kingdoms like Carchemish survived for centuries, their rulers still using Hittite titles and art styles, a ghostly echo of the empire that was. Standing among Hattusa's silent walls today, you can almost hear the whispers of a civilization caught between forces beyond its control. The Hittites mastered diplomacy, law, and war, but not the climate shifts that turned their world to dust. Their end wasn't a single event, but a cascade. Drought bred famine, famine bred chaos, and chaos invited the wolves at the door. In their ashes, we see a warning etched not in stone, but in the fragile threads that bind any society to its land and its people. The Sea Peoples may have been the storm, but the Hittites' own rigid structure left them unable to bend before it broke them. Perched on a flattened mountaintop in Oaxaca, Monte Alban was once the beating heart of Zapotec civilization, a city so formidable its terraced pyramids and carved stone monuments dominated the valley below for over 1,000 years. By 800 CE, this grand citadel could boast a population of 25,000, an intricate writing system, and a network of alliances stretching across Mesoamerica. Yet within just a few generations, its plazas fell silent, its temples abandoned to the elements. But unlike other ancient collapses, the Zapotecs didn't vanish. They fragmented, scattering into smaller city-states like Mitla and Zoquilla, their culture adapting but never fully disappearing. What forced a people who'd weathered centuries of challenges to abandon their sacred capital? The answers lie in a tangle of drought, warfare, and a shifting political landscape. First, look to the sky. Sediment cores from nearby Lake Chichancanab reveal a pattern all too familiar in Mesoamerican collapses, a series of severe droughts between 800 and 1000 CE. For a civilization reliant on rain-fed agriculture, this wasn't just hardship, it was existential. At Monte Alban's outskirts, archaeologists have found evidence of emergency terraces carved into hillsides, a desperate attempt to capture every drop of erratic rainfall. Yet climate alone doesn't explain the city's peculiar decline. Unlike the violent sackings of Chala or the chaotic abandonment of Cahokia, Monte Alban shows no layers of ash from burning, no mass graves. Instead, its downfall feels almost deliberate, like a strategic retreat. This is where the Mixtecs enter the story. By the 9th century, these rival highlanders were pushing into Zapotec territory, not as destroyers but as infiltrators. At sites like Monte Alban's Tomb 7, Mixtec artifacts appear alongside Zapotec ones, suggesting a slow cultural blending rather than outright conquest. Some scholars believe the Zapotec elite may have even invited Mixtec warriors as mercenaries during internal power struggles, only to find their guests becoming rulers. The famous Codex Zauch-Nuttall, a Mixtec pictorial manuscript, depicts marriages between Mixtec nobles and Zapotec royalty, a diplomatic dance that gradually shifted the balance of power. Yet the most fascinating clue lies in what the Zapotecs chose to take with them. When they left Monte Alban, they didn't abandon their identity. At Mitla, their new spiritual center, artisans recreated the intricate geometric mosaics that had adorned their old capital, but with a twist. The designs grew even more elaborate, as if asserting cultural pride in the face of change. The Zapotec language, still spoken today in Oaxaca's valleys, carries echoes of the inscriptions left at Monte Alban, proof that a civilization can transform without dying. The true lesson of Monte Alban isn't one of collapse but of resilience. The Zapotecs didn't fall, they dispersed like seeds on the wind, rooting themselves in new soil. Their story reminds us that civilizations aren't monoliths, they're living tapestries, capable of unraveling in one place only to be rewoven elsewhere. The stones of Monte Alban still whisper their names, not as a lament but as a testament to endurance. 12,000 years ago, a culture of hunters thrived across North America. Masters of stone and survival, their distinctive fluted spear points found from coast to coast. These were the Clovis people, named for the New Mexico site where their artifacts were first discovered. Their technology was revolutionary, razor-sharp projectile points, some still clinging to traces of mammoth blood, proof of their prowess against Ice Age giants. Yet within a few centuries, their tools vanish from the archaeological record, their legacy swallowed by time, just as the mammoths and saber-toothed cats they hunted disappeared forever. What could erase a culture so widespread, so quickly? The debate rages between two fiery possibilities, one falling from the sky, the other lying in human hands. First, the celestial suspect. In 2007, a team of scientists proposed a startling theory. a fragmented comet exploded over North America around 12,800 years ago, triggering a cataclysm known as the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. Evidence cited includes microscopic diamonds called nanodiamonds formed under extreme pressure, found in Clovis-era sediment layers, along with unusually high concentrations of iridium, an element rare on Earth but common in space rocks. Imagine fireballs raining down, igniting continent-spanning wildfires, followed by a nuclear winter of dust and ash blighting the sun. Climate proxies from Greenland ice cores show a sudden plunge in temperatures during this period, a 1,000-year cold snap that would have devastated ecosystems already stressed by glacial retreat. For the Clovis people, reliant on megafauna like mastodons for survival, this could have been a death knell: no prey, no way to adapt, but not all scientists are convinced. Critics point to gaps in the impact theory. Some alleged impact sites show no conclusive crater evidence, and alternative explanations exist for the nanodiamonds. This is where the second suspect emerges: the Clovis people themselves. Their signature spear points are often found alongside mammoth bones, suggesting they hunted these creatures to extinction, a scenario called overkill. Modern simulations show how even small bands of hunters targeting slow-breeding megafauna could have tipped the balance. The timing fits. As Clovis populations expanded, megafauna populations crumbled. Without their primary food source, the hunters might have fragmented, their technology simplifying as they switched to smaller game. Some archaeologists see this in later, cruder spear points, a cultural unraveling spelled in stone. Yet the truth may lie between stars and spears. Recent research suggests a 1-2 punch. Climate shifts at the end of the Ice Age already stressed megafauna, making them vulnerable to human hunting. Then, whether by comet or natural fluctuations, the Younger Dryas freeze delivered the final blow. At the Murray Springs Clovis site in Arizona, a dark layer of sediment, dubbed the Black Mat, caps Clovis artifacts, preserving a snapshot of sudden change. Above it, the mammoth bones disappear. The Clovis legacy endures in whispers. Genetic studies hint that some modern indigenous groups carry their ancestry, their culture not vanishing but evolving. Their disappearance reminds us that even the most adaptable societies are threads in a wider web, vulnerable to the pull of climate, the weight of their own choices, or the cruel randomness of a comet's path. Their spear points, scattered like forgotten questions, still pierce the earth, waiting for answers. High on the arid plains of the Andes, where the air is so thin it feels like breathing through a sieve, the ruins of Tiwanaku stand as a monument to human ambition and its limits. This was no ordinary city. At its peak around 500 CE, it was the spiritual and political heart of a civilization that stretched across modern-day Bolivia, Peru, Chile, and Argentina. Its architects aligned temples with celestial events. Its stonemasons fitted multi-ton blocks together so precisely that not even a razor blade could slide between them, and its artisans carved gateways depicting weeping gods holding staffs that may have been ancient agricultural calendars. Yet by 1000 CE, the plazas where thousands once gathered for ceremonies lay silent, the grand Acapona pyramid half-finished, and the megalithic gateway of the sun left standing alone like a sentinel guarding nothing. What could dismantle an empire that had thrived for centuries in one of the planet's most unforgiving environments? The answer, quite literally, dried up. Lake Titicaca, the lifeblood of Tiwanaku, holds the first clue. Sediment cores drilled from its bed tell a story of relentless drought between 900 and 1100 CE. The shoreline receded by miles, stranding canals and farm fields that once flourished with quinoa and potatoes. For a civilization built on raised field agriculture, an ingenious system of sunken plots and water channels that insulated crops from frost, this was catastrophic. Without the lake's moderating influence, nighttime temperatures plunged, killing seedlings. Archaeologists have found evidence of frantic adaptation. Fields relocated closer to remnant marshes, canals dug deeper. But it wasn't enough. In the city's final layers, storage pits sit empty, and the bones of llamas once sacrificed in lavish ceremonies show signs of malnutrition. Then there's the haunting evidence of halted ambition. The Pumapunku complex, a cluster of precision-cut andesite blocks that defy explanation, was clearly meant to be something grander. Some stones weigh over 130 tons, their surfaces drilled with holes and channels that suggest an unfinished technological marvel, perhaps a hydraulic system or celestial observatory. The largest block, nicknamed El Fraile, lies abandoned mid-transport, still bearing the rope grooves from its last tug. This wasn't a sudden catastrophe like Pompeii's ash. It was a slow suffocation, a people watching their future evaporate day by parched day. Yet the most telling detail lies in the stones themselves. Tiwanaku's later constructions are smaller, cruder, as if the knowledge of how to work megaliths was evaporating along with the water. The iconic sun gate, carved with the staff god who may have represented their central deity, was likely one of the last masterpieces. By the time the Inca rose centuries later, they regarded Tiwanaku as the work of gods, not humans, a civilization so advanced its decline seemed unthinkable. But decline isn't the same as disappearance. Tiwanaku's people didn't vanish. They dispersed into the highlands, their descendants likely among the Aymara-speaking communities still farming these harsh lands today. Their legacy lingers in terraced fields and folklore, in the way modern Bolivians still pour offerings of chicha beer into the earth, just as their ancestors might have done. The stones of Tiwanaku, though silent, still whisper a warning. No amount of engineering genius can outlast a changing sky. When the rains refuse to fall, even gods must pack their bags. The great earthen mounds of the Mississippian culture once dominated the American heartland, from the banks of the Mississippi River to the Appalachian foothills. These weren't just piles of dirt, they were monuments to a sophisticated society, with sprawling cities like Cahokia boasting larger populations than medieval London. But by the time European explorers like Hernando de Soto arrived in the 16th century, the mounds stood empty, their builders long gone. What could have brought down a civilization that thrived for centuries? The clues lie in a chilling combination of shifting climates and simmering social tensions, a reminder that even the most resilient societies can fracture under pressure. Tree rings from ancient bald cypresses tell a story of dramatic change. Starting around 1300 CE, the Northern Hemisphere entered a period now called the Little Ice Age, a climatic shift that brought cooler summers, unpredictable rains, and shorter growing seasons. For the Mississippians, whose maize-based agriculture relied on consistent warmth and moisture, this spelled disaster. Archaeological sites from this period show shrinking harvests, with corn cobs becoming smaller and fewer in number. At the Kincaid site in Illinois, storage pits that once held surplus grain were repurposed as trash heaps, filled with broken tools and animal bones picked clean of every scrap of marrow. The message is clear: hunger had become a constant shadow, yet climate alone doesn't explain the violence etched into the land. At Cahokia's later stages, palisades, wooden stockades, were hastily erected around elite neighborhoods, their posts sunk deep as if bracing for an attack. Skeletons unearthed near these walls bear gruesome injuries, skulls crushed by blunt objects, arrowheads lodged in vertebrae. Some graves show signs of ritualistic execution with hands bound behind backs. This wasn't just external conflict, it suggests a society turning on itself. One theory points to the rigid hierarchy that had sustained Mississippian cities. As resources dwindled, the ruling class may have doubled down on demands for tribute, sparking revolts among the farmers and artisans who could no longer feed their families. The final blow might have come from an unexpected source: their own ingenuity. The Mississippians were master engineers, constructing vast irrigation systems to water their fields. But sediment cores from the Black Bottom region reveal a tragic irony. Their canals, designed to combat drought, may have accelerated soil depletion. By redirecting natural waterways, they inadvertently washed away fertile topsoil, leaving behind barren patches unfit for cultivation. At the Wycliffe Mounds in Kentucky, archaeologists found evidence of emergency crop rotations, as if farmers were frantically experimenting with anything that might grow in the exhausted earth. What's most haunting isn't the collapse itself, but how quietly it unfolded. Unlike the dramatic fires that consumed Mycenae or the apocalyptic tsunamis that battered the Minoans, the Mississippians' decline was a slow unraveling. Villages didn't burn, they emptied, one family at a time, as people dispersed into smaller, mobile bands. By the time Europeans arrived, the mounds were already ancient mysteries, their builders remembered only in fragments of oral tradition. The Natchez people, among the last Mississippian descendants, still spoke of a great chief who ruled from a temple atop a mound, a ghostly echo of a world that had once stretched from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico. The lesson of the Mississippians isn't just about fragility, it's about adaptation. Their descendants didn't vanish, they reinvented themselves, trading monumental cities for flexible communities better suited to a changing world. The mounds still stand today, silent witnesses to a truth as old as civilization itself. Sometimes survival means knowing when to walk away. South of Egypt, where the Nile carves through golden deserts, the kingdom of Kush once stood as Africa's other great civilization, a land of iron smelters, pyramid builders, and queens who ruled as equals to kings. For centuries, Kush thrived, even conquering Egypt itself during the 25th dynasty. But by the 4th century CE, its glittering capital of Mara lay in ruins, its temples plundered, its people scattered. The fall of Kush wasn't a single dramatic event, but a slow unraveling, tied to the land itself turning against them and a rival kingdom rising in the shadows. The first blow came from the earth. Core samples from the Sahara tell a grim story. Creeping desertification tightened its grip on Kush's heartland during this period. The kingdom had always balanced precariously between the Nile's lifeblood and the encroaching dunes, but as rainfall patterns shifted, their agricultural belts shrank. Archaeologists found abandoned farmsteads northwest of Mara, their irrigation channels choked with sand. A Roman trader's account from the 3rd century describes Kushite caravans traveling farther each year to find grazing lands for their cattle, a silent crisis playing out step by step. The kingdom's legendary iron production, once so prolific that Mara was called the Birmingham of Africa, may have accelerated the problem. To smelt iron, they needed charcoal, and charcoal required trees. Pollen studies show acacia forests dwindling as furnaces burned hotter and longer, stripping the land of its natural defenses against erosion. Then came Axum. This rising power in the Ethiopian highlands had been Kush's trading partner for centuries, but by the 3rd century their relationship soured into rivalry. Axum's king, Azana, left inscriptions boasting of victories over the Noba, likely the Kushites, and by 350 CE, his armies sacked Mara itself. Axumite coins from this period depict Azana holding a spear and a cross, a stark symbol of both military might and religious shift. While Kush had flirted with Christianity, adopting some symbols but never fully converting, Axum embraced it fervently, aligning with Rome and gaining access to its naval power. The Red Sea trade routes that had once enriched Kush now bypassed them entirely, their gold and ivory flowing through Axumite ports instead. Yet Kush's decline wasn't just about Axum's ascendancy or arid winds. Internal fractures played a role too. The later rulers of Mara struggled to maintain control over distant provinces, and graffiti in abandoned temples hints at rebellions among the Noba people who may have been chafing under Kushite rule. The final irony, Mara's downfall wasn't total. Smaller Kushite kingdoms like Nobatia and Ulwa lingered for centuries, blending with Nubian cultures and adopting Christianity, their artisans still producing exquisite pottery with motifs eerily similar to those of Mara's golden age. The stones of Kush, though scarred by time, refused to forget whispering of an empire that didn't so much vanish as merge into the tapestry of the lands it once ruled. For nearly 2,000 years, the Dorset people thrived in some of the harshest landscapes on Earth, the frozen coasts of the Arctic, from Greenland to Canada's northern islands. Unlike their Inuit neighbors, the Dorset carved delicate ivory figurines, built igloos before the Inuit did, and hunted seals through holes in the ice without kayaks or dog sleds, relying instead on stealth and patience. Their world was one of quiet resilience, where survival depended on reading the subtle cracks in the ice and the migrations of walrus herds. Yet by 1500 CE, their fires had flickered out, their settlements abandoned to the endless twilight of the Arctic winter. What could erase a people so perfectly adapted to the cold? The answer lies in a collision of cultures and a climate that turned against them. The first whispers of trouble came from the east. Around the year 1000 CE, a new wave of migrants, the Thule, ancestors of today's Inuit, began moving into Dorset territory. These newcomers brought game-changing technologies, swift umiaks for open water hunting, teams of sled dogs for crossing vast distances, and powerful harpoons capable of taking down bowhead whales. The Dorset, meanwhile, clung to older ways. Their tools remained small and elegant, their hunting methods unchanged for centuries. Archaeologists have found Thule winter houses built directly atop Dorset camps, a silent testament to displacement. But was this violent conquest or something more complex? At sites like Nunalak in Alaska, Dorset and Thule artifacts appear side by side, suggesting periods of trade and even intermarriage before the Dorset artifacts vanish completely. Then there's the ice itself. Sediment cores from Baffin Island reveal a climatic roller coaster during the Little Ice Age, with sea ice expanding unpredictably. For the Dorset, whose survival hinged on predictable seal migrations, this was catastrophic. Their signature Inuksuq stone markers, once used to guide hunters across the tundra, now pointed toward dwindling prey. Worse, the same cold snap that made life harder for the Dorset may have helped the Thule thrive. Their whale hunting techniques excelled in icy waters, giving them a surplus of meat and blubber to weather lean times. The final Dorset refuge might have been Greenland's remote fjords, where a handful of holdouts lingered into the 15th century. Here, the last traces of their culture emerge in eerie carvings, tiny, emaciated human figures with hollow eyes, as if capturing their own fading existence. Unlike the Maya or the Minoans, the Dorset left no grand ruins, only subtle scars on the land. A circle of stones where a tent once stood, a bone needle dropped in the snow. Their disappearance wasn't an explosion, but a sigh, a people stepping off the stage of history so quietly that even their name was forgotten until archaeologists pieced it together centuries later. Yet the Dorset's legacy lingers in unexpected places. Modern Inuit oral traditions speak of the Tuniat, a gentle, shy people they displaced, a likely memory of the Dorset. And in DNA studies, some Greenlandic Inuit show faint traces of Dorset ancestry, hinting at fleeting encounters in the long Arctic night. Their story is a reminder that adaptation isn't always enough, that even the most skilled survivors can vanish when the world changes too fast, leaving behind only whispers in the wind and ivory figures clutching secrets we'll never fully understand. 500 years before Columbus crossed the Atlantic, Norse longships sliced through icy waters to reach a land they called Vinland, modern-day Newfoundland. At Elant's Ox Meadows, archaeologists uncovered the ghostly outlines of turf-walled halls, iron smithies, and even a carpentry workshop where Viking explorers repaired their ships. This wasn't just a fleeting camp, it was a full-fledged settlement, complete with evidence of women's work like weaving and cooking. Yet within a decade, the Norse packed up and left, their dreams of a North American foothold abandoned. Why would seafarers who braved the open ocean turn their backs on a land brimming with timber, grapes, and fertile soil? the answer lies somewhere between bloody clashes and crushing loneliness. The saga's Icelandic texts, written centuries later, speak of skirmishes with indigenous groups the Norse called Skraelings, likely the ancestors of the Beothuk or Micmac. At Elant's Ox Meadows, archaeologists found butternuts which don't grow in Newfoundland but thrive farther south, suggesting the Norse explored beyond their base and likely encountered resistance. One saga describes a pitched battle where indigenous fighters used loud noisemakers to terrify the invaders, while another tells of a Norse leader, Thorfinn Karlsefni, ordering his men to drop their weapons and trade instead of fight. The message is clear: this wasn't empty wilderness but a populated land where the newcomers were badly outnumbered. Yet conflict alone doesn't explain the abandonment. Greenland's Norse settlements, though isolated, clung to existence for centuries. Why couldn't Vinland? The answer might lie in the crushing weight of distance. Sailing from Greenland to Vinland meant weeks at sea through treacherous iceberg-strewn waters, and maintaining supply lines across such a vast stretch was nearly impossible. Excavations at Elant's Ox Meadows reveal no graves, no livestock pens, no signs of permanent farming, just a seasonal hub stripped bare when the Norse left. Unlike Greenland, where they could lean on walrus ivory trade with Europe, Vinland offered no commodity valuable enough to justify the perilous voyages. The climate, too, turned against them. Tree rings from Greenland show a cooling period around the year 1000 CE, making transatlantic crossings even more dangerous. A Norse coin found in Maine hints at later, desperate voyages, perhaps attempts to relocate as Greenland's own settlements starved, but Vinland's door had slammed shut. By the time warmer weather returned, Europe had forgotten the westward routes and the sagas faded into legend. What lingers is a haunting what-if. Had the Norse forged alliances instead of fights, had they clung to Vinland through the cold centuries, our maps might look utterly different. But history favors the persistent, and the Norse, for all their bravery, were simply too few, too far, and too late. The turf walls at Elant's Ox Meadows didn't collapse, they were left standing, as if waiting for inhabitants who never returned. The New World's first European chapter ended not with a bang, but with the quiet creak of a longship's oars rowing eastward, back into the fog of oblivion. On the sun-baked plains of southern Spain, where the Guadalquivir River meets the Atlantic, a civilization of legendary wealth once thrived, only to vanish as mysteriously as the morning fog. The Tartessos people, known to the ancient Greeks as masters of silver and traders of tin, built a kingdom so prosperous that Homer himself sang of its riches. Their capital, often called Tartessos or Tarshish in biblical texts, was said to have walls lined with precious metals and streets bustling with Phoenician and Greek merchants. Yet by 500 BC, this cultural crossroads disappeared from history, leaving behind only whispers in classical texts and a haunting question: how could a society so vital dissolve without a trace? Theories swirl like river currents around their downfall. Greek historian Herodotus spun a tale of catastrophic floods, a deluge so fierce it swallowed the city whole. Modern geologists have found evidence of seismic activity along the Iberian coast around this time, raising the possibility of tsunamis or sudden shifts in river courses. Core samples from the Doñana wetlands reveal layers of marine sediment mixed with ancient debris, suggesting the Tartessos heartland may have been inundated by a storm surge or gradual sea rise. But water wasn't the only threat. Tartessos' prosperity depended on trade with the Phoenicians, whose colonies dotted the Mediterranean. When Phoenician power waned under Assyrian attacks, the Tartessians lost their primary buyers for silver and tin. Excavations at Hulva show abandoned smelting furnaces, their chimneys cold, as if the lifeblood of the economy had simply stopped flowing. Then there's the enigma of their elusive capital. Despite centuries of searching, no definitive site has been confirmed. The ruins of Cancho Rono, a Tartessian sanctuary, offer tantalizing clues: gold jewelry, ivory carvings, and a ritual pool aligned with celestial events, but it's a shadow of the fabled metropolis. Some scholars argue the city might lie beneath modern Seville's bustling streets or the shifting marshes of Doñana National Park. Others propose a more unsettling idea, that Tartessos was never a single city at all, but a decentralized network of wealthy towns united by culture rather than walls. The Tartessian language, preserved on a handful of stelae, compounds the mystery. Its script resembles a blend of Phoenician and local Iberian symbols, yet remains largely undeciphered. One stele from Alcalá del Rio depicts a warrior beside cryptic glyphs, perhaps a king's epitaph or a plea to forgotten gods. Without a Rosetta Stone to unlock these texts, we're left to wonder if their disappearance was recorded in words we'll never read. What lingers is the echo of a civilization that bridged worlds, the meeting point of Atlantic and Mediterranean, of myth and history. The Tartessians didn't just vanish, they blurred into the cultural tapestry of Iberia, their legacy carried by later peoples like the Turdetani. When Roman miners rediscovered the region's silver veins centuries later, they unwittingly followed in footsteps long faded from memory. The land remembers even if history forgot. The vast steppes of Central Asia have always been a stage for epic migrations, but few stories are as dramatic or as consequential as that of the Yuezhi. These nomadic herders once roamed the grasslands of modern-day Western China, controlling the lucrative jade trade along the Silk Road and living in relative prosperity. Then, around 170 BC, their world shattered. The Xiongnu, fierce equestrian warriors from the north, launched a devastating attack, killing the Yuezhi king and sending his people fleeing westward in a desperate exodus that would reshape the heart of Asia. At first, the Yuezhi sought refuge in the Ili Valley near present-day Kazakhstan, but the Xiongnu, relentless in their pursuit, harassed them for decades, forcing them ever further from their homeland. Ancient Chinese chronicles describe a people fractured by defeat, splintering into two groups: the Greater Yuezhi, who pushed deeper into Central Asia, and the Lesser Yuezhi, who submitted to the Xiongnu and faded into obscurity. For the Greater Yuezhi, survival meant constant movement. They crossed the Fergana Valley, skirted the edges of the Tian Shan Mountains, and finally stumbled into the Greco-Bactrian kingdom, a crumbling remnant of Alexander the Great's empire. Here, the historical record grows murky. Greek and Roman sources barely mention the Yuezhi, while Chinese accounts offer only fleeting glimpses. What happened next is a puzzle pieced together from scattered coins, fragmented inscriptions, and the ruins of forgotten cities. Somehow, these displaced nomads didn't just survive, they thrived. By the 1st century CE, the Yuezhi had coalesced into the Kushan Empire, a powerhouse that stretched from Afghanistan to northern India. Their sudden rise from desperate refugees to rulers of a vast domain is one of history's most astonishing turnarounds. The key to their success might lie in their adaptability. Unlike other conquerors, the Kushans didn't impose their culture. They absorbed and synthesized. Their coins bear the images of Greek, Persian, and Hindu deities, reflecting a deliberate embrace of the diverse peoples they ruled. At Mathura and Begram, Kushan artisans produced stunning hybrid art. Buddha statues draped in Greco-Roman togas, ivory carvings depicting scenes from Indian epics. Even their language, a form of Bactrian, was written in Greek script, a testament to their ability to bridge worlds. Yet for all their achievements, the Yuezhi's early years remained shrouded in silence. How did they maintain cohesion during those decades of wandering? What negotiations or battles secured their foothold in Bactria? The answers might lie buried beneath the sands of Turkmenistan or hidden in untranslated manuscripts. Until then, their story lingers like a half-remembered legend, a reminder that even the mightiest empires can begin as a band of survivors, fleeing into the unknown with nothing but the will to endure. For centuries, Sogdian merchants were the lifeblood of the Silk Road polyglot traders who turned the arid stretches between Persia and China into a vibrant web of commerce and culture. Their cities, like Samarkand and Bukhara, glittered with Zoroastrian temples, bustling bazaars, and libraries where languages as distant as Sanskrit and Syriac mingled. Sogdian letters, recovered from the sands of Central Asia, reveal a world where a merchant in Dunhuang could order blue-eyed slaves from Constantinople, or a princess in Chang'an might wear Persian brocades delivered by camel caravans. Yet by the 8th century, their voices began to fade, drowned out by the clatter of Arab cavalry and the call of the muezzin. The Sogdian silence wasn't a sudden collapse, but a slow, inexorable absorption, a civilization dissolving into the very trade routes it had mastered. The Arab conquests of the 7th and 8th centuries reshaped Central Asia like a desert wind erasing footprints. At first, the Sogdians tried to navigate the new order as they always had, through negotiation and adaptation. Records from Samarkand show local nobles paying tribute to Arab generals, even converting to Islam superficially while quietly maintaining fire temples in secret courtyards. But the Umayyad Caliphate demanded more than taxes. They sought cultural submission. Persian manuscripts describe the systematic dismantling of Sogdian institutions. Zoroastrian priests were taxed into poverty. Sogdian script was replaced by Arabic in official documents, and the vibrant murals of Panjaikan depicting wine-drinking nobles and Hindu deities were whitewashed under layers of plaster. The Sogdians' greatest strength, their ability to bridge cultures, became their undoing. Without a centralized state or militant identity, they were ill-equipped to resist the Caliphate's homogenizing force. Yet the true tragedy lies in what was lost beyond politics. Sogdian art was a kaleidoscope of influences: Buddhist frescoes with Greek shading techniques, silver plates depicting feasts inspired by Sasanian royalty. Their language, once the lingua franca of the Silk Road, fragmented into dialects before vanishing entirely, leaving only loanwords in Persian and Chinese. Even their legendary commercial networks unraveled. A 9th-century Arab geographer lamented that the once teeming caravanserais of Merv now stood half empty, their Sogdian stewards replaced by Abbasid bureaucrats. The final blow came from an unexpected quarter: climate change. Dendrochronology shows that the 8th century marked the onset of severe droughts in Central Asia, turning marginal farmland to dust and making Sogdian agriculture untenable. Starving refugees flooded into cities already straining under Arab rule, accelerating the cultural erasure, but the Sogdians didn't so much disappear as transform. In the villages of Tajikistan's Zarafshan Valley, elders still recite wedding songs with traces of Sogdian vocabulary. The famed Sufi poet Rumi, born in Balkh, wove Sogdian poetic meters into his Persian verses without even realizing their origin. And in China, Tang dynasty tombs still yield clay figurines of blue-eyed caravan leaders frozen in time, their faces echoing a world where a Sogdian's word was as good as gold. The silence isn't absolute. It's a whisper woven into the fabric of empires that rose and fell long after the last Sogdian trader closed his ledger. Along the arid coast of northern Peru, where the desert meets the pounding Pacific, the Moch people built an empire of clay and gold. Their towering pyramids, adorned with vivid murals of gods and warriors, dominated the landscape for over 600 years. They were master engineers, weaving intricate irrigation canals to turn barren valleys into lush farmland, and artisans whose pottery captured every detail of their world, from octopus tentacles curling around vessels to erotic scenes painted with startling realism. Yet by 800 CE, their cities stood abandoned, their temples swallowed by sand, and their people scattered like pebbles in a storm. The mystery of their downfall lingers in the very walls they left behind, whispering of floods, rebellion, and a society pushed to the breaking point. The first clue lies in the sediment layers of the Moch River Valley, where geologists have uncovered evidence of monstrous El Niño events striking around the 6th and 8th centuries. These weren't just heavy rains, they were biblical deluges. Excavations at the Huaca de la Luna reveal mud bricks melted into soggy ruins, their painted friezes of the fanged deity Aya Peak smeared into oblivion. Further north, at the site of Pampa Grande, archaeologists found an entire irrigation system buried under 10 feet of silt, as if the earth itself had turned against them. For a culture that thrived on precision agriculture, this was apocalyptic. Crops rotted in waterlogged fields, while stored food supplies carefully stockpiled against drought were washed away in torrents of mud. The Moche had weathered El Niños before, but these were different, back-to-back catastrophes that left no time to recover. Yet nature wasn't the only culprit. Buried beneath the ruins of the Huaca del Sol, the Moche's largest adobe pyramid, lie darker secrets, mass graves filled with shattered skeletons, many showing signs of blunt force trauma and ritual dismemberment. Some skulls bear the distinctive marks of Tumi knives, ceremonial blades used in sacrifices to appease the gods. Were these victims slain in desperation as the floods raged? Or does their grisly fate point to something more sinister, a ruling elite clinging to power by escalating violence? The answer might lie in the Moche's own artwork. Late-period pottery depicts bound prisoners with hollow eyes, their throats slit above overflowing goblets, while murals show processions of warriors dragging captives to altars. This wasn't just religion, it was a society unraveling, its leaders demanding ever more blood to stave off collapse. Then there's the eerie silence of the Lords of Sepang. In 1987, archaeologists uncovered an undisturbed royal tomb, a time capsule of Moche splendor. The warrior priest lay entombed in layers of gold and silver, surrounded by sacrificed attendants, his chest plate emblazoned with a spider deity. But the later burials tell a different story. At Huaca Cao Viejo, a noblewoman was buried with a broken scepter and hastily assembled grave goods, as if her mourners were scrambling to maintain tradition in the face of chaos. The final rulers of the Moche weren't buried in gold. They vanished without tombs at all, their legacy reduced to scattered bones and half-finished pyramids. The truth of their collapse isn't written in a single disaster, but in the interplay of many. El Niño may have ignited the crisis, but it was the Moche's rigid theocracy, their belief that kings could control the rains through sacrifice, that left them unable to adapt. When the floods kept coming, faith turned to fury. Farmers abandoned the valleys, artisans dropped their tools mid-stroke, and the once great ceremonial centers became ghost towns. Unlike the Maya or the Khmer, the Moche left no descendants to carry their name. Their language vanished, their gods forgotten until the desert wind uncovered their murals, revealing a civilization that didn't so much fall as drown, swallowed by the very waters they'd spent centuries trying to command. Today, their pyramids stand as stark reminders. Even the mightiest empires are just sandcastles against the tide of time. High in the windswept deserts of New Mexico, the ruins of Choco Canyon stand as a haunting monument to human ambition, a sprawling complex of great houses, celestial observatories, and ceremonial roads that once pulsed with life. By the mid-12th century, however, this thriving hub of the ancestral pueblones lay silent, its meticulously planned structures abandoned to the relentless sun. The question isn't just why they left, but why they never returned, not even to reclaim the priceless turquoise beads, the finely woven baskets, or the ceramic vessels still resting where they were last set down. The answer may lie in a convergence of ecological crisis, spiritual reckoning, and a society pushed to its limits. Start with the land itself. Tree rings from ancient ponderosa pines tell a story of unrelenting drought between 1130 and 1180 CE, the worst in the region in over 700 years. For the Chacones, whose agriculture depended on capturing every drop of erratic rainfall through intricate systems of check dams and terraces, this was catastrophic. Archaeologists have found corn cobs in late-period storage rooms that are stunted and shriveled, their kernels half the size of earlier harvests, but drought alone doesn't explain the eerie precision of the departure. At Pueblo Bonito, the canyon's grandest great house, researchers uncovered deliberate closures, doorways sealed with masonry, ritual objects placed carefully in niches, as if the buildings were being ceremonially put to sleep. This wasn't a panicked flight, it was a planned exodus. Then there's the deforestation puzzle. To build Chaco's monumental structures, the ancestral Puebloans needed an estimated 200,000 trees hauled from mountains over 50 miles away without wheels or pack animals. Soil studies reveal the toll. By 1100 CE, the surrounding hillsides were stripped bare, triggering erosion that choked once fertile farmland with silt. Yet here's the twist: the Chacoans weren't oblivious to the crisis. At Aztec ruins, a later outlier community, builders switched to smaller logs and recycled timbers from older structures, a clear sign of resource scarcity. Why then did they keep expanding Chaco even as the environment crumbled around them? Some scholars argue the canyon wasn't just a settlement, it was a pilgrimage center, a sacred landscape where construction itself was an act of devotion regardless of practicality. This spiritual dimension adds layers to the mystery. Chaco's alignment with solstices and lunar cycles suggests its rulers weren't just political leaders but cosmic intermediaries. When the rains failed, did their authority collapse? At Chetroquetl, a great house near Pueblo Bonito, archaeologists found evidence of ritual fires lit in abandoned rooms, perhaps last-ditch ceremonies to summon the gods. Meanwhile, in the wider region, defensive structures began appearing at outlier sites like Salmon ruins, hinting at social unrest. Were the Chacoans facing rebellion from outlying communities tired of sending tribute to a drying ceremonial core? The most compelling theory bridges all these threads. The ancestral Puebloans may have viewed Chaco not as a permanent home, but as a temporary cosmopolis, a place to gather, worship, and then move on when its purpose was fulfilled. Oral histories from modern Pueblo descendants speak of migrations as spiritual imperatives, cycles of renewal written into their very identity. The roads radiating from Chaco, some stretching dozens of miles in perfectly straight lines, might not have been trade routes at all, but sacred pathways for pilgrims and later for departure. What's left is a landscape of quiet defiance. The Chacoans didn't vanish, they dispersed, their legacy carried in the masonry techniques of Mesa Verde, the astronomy of Hovenweep, the Kiva rituals of Hopi and Zuni villages. The canyon's emptiness isn't a grave, but a stage awaiting the next act. Even now, when monsoon clouds gather over Fajada Butte, casting shadows on the spiral petroglyphs below, it's easy to imagine the ancestors watching, not as ghosts, but as witnesses to a truth they understood better than us, that civilizations, like seasons, have their time. And sometimes the greatest act of resilience is knowing when to walk away. The vast steppes of Central Asia once trembled under the thunder of Xiongnu horsemen, a nomadic empire so formidable that it forced China's mighty Han dynasty to build the first Great Wall. These masters of the bow ruled a territory stretching from Manchuria to the Altai Mountains, extracting tribute from settled civilizations through sheer terror. Yet by the 1st century CE, their empire crumbled like dry grass in the wind, scattering into fragments that would echo through history. What could break a people who had thrived on mobility and war? The answer lies not in battlefield defeats, but in the slow, relentless pressure of a patient adversary and the unforgiving politics of the steppe. China's Han rulers learned the hard way that confronting the Xiongnu head-on was suicide. After early disasters, they switched tactics not with swords but with silk. Emperor Wu's court launched a campaign of economic warfare, flooding the steppes with luxury goods to create dependency. Xiongnu nobles grew addicted to Chinese wine, brocades, and lacquerware, their once self-sufficient warriors now reliant on trade caravans. Simultaneously, the Han exploited ancient rivalries, offering titles and gold to rebellious Xiongnu princes. A scribe's record from 99 BC captures the chaos. 3 kings came to us bearing the severed head of their own Chanyu ruler, each demanding rewards. The empire didn't shatter overnight, it unraveled like a frayed rope, strand by strand. Yet the Xiongnu's legacy refused to die. As their central authority collapsed, splinter groups migrated westward, their names morphing in foreign chronicles. Some scholars believe the Huns who terrorized Rome centuries later carried Xiongnu bloodlines and tactics. Both peoples shared a signature composite bow, a taste for psychological warfare, and even similar tribal tattoos. Genetic studies of Hungarian conquerors reveal Asian paternal lineages that could trace back to these displaced steppe clans. Meanwhile, in the east, the Xianbei and Rouran nomads absorbed Xiongnu refugees, blending their traditions into new confederations that would later challenge China's Sui and Tang dynasties. The most haunting evidence of their endurance lies beneath the soil of Mongolia. At the Noyon Ul burial site, archaeologists uncovered Xiongnu nobles buried in lacquered coffins, a Chinese custom yet surrounded by sacrificed horses and felt wall hangings depicting wolves, the ancient steppe symbol of independence. These weren't defeated people, they were adapters straddling 2 worlds even in death. Modern Mongolians still revere the Xiongnu as ancestors, their spirit alive in the throat singing that mimics wind across the grasslands and in the stubborn resistance to settled life. The Xiongnu's disappearance wasn't an ending, but a dispersal like dandelion seeds caught in history's gale. Their greatest lesson endures: nomad empires seldom die by conquest alone. They fracture when their people forget how to bend, when the open steppe becomes a cage, and when the sound of galloping hooves grows fainter than the clink of foreign gold. What remains is whispered in the languages of a dozen descendant nations, a testament to the power that once made emperors tremble and walls rise stone by stone. For centuries, the Lapita people were the undisputed masters of the Pacific, daring navigators who crossed thousands of miles of open ocean in double-hulled canoes, settling remote islands from New Guinea to Tonga. Their distinctive pottery, stamped with intricate geometric patterns, became the calling card of one of history's greatest maritime expansions. But around 500 BC, something strange happened. The pottery stops, the voyages seem to pause. For nearly 1,000 years, the trail of colonization goes cold, an eerie silence archaeologists call the Lapita Gap. What could make a people who'd conquered the sea suddenly vanish from the record? The answer lies in a combination of ecological limits and a cultural transformation so profound it birthed entirely new civilizations. Diving into the soil of ancient Lapita sites tells the first part of this story. On islands like Efate in Vanuatu, archaeologists have uncovered layers of shellfish debris and bird bones, evidence of societies thriving on abundant coastal resources. Then abruptly, the middens shrink. The bones shift from large, flightless birds to smaller, scarcer species. It's as if the Lapita hit an invisible wall. The islands they settled were small, fragile ecosystems. Once they hunted the megafauna to extinction and fished the reefs bare, there simply wasn't enough left to sustain their growing populations. Unlike continents where people could move inland when coasts were depleted, these islanders had nowhere to go but the horizon, and by this point, the nearest untouched islands lay dangerously far across uncharted waters. Yet scarcity alone doesn't explain the cultural shift. The Lapita didn't just disappear, they evolved. Recent genetic studies reveal a fascinating continuity. Modern Polynesians carry Lapita ancestry, proving this wasn't extinction, it was metamorphosis. The key may lie in what they stopped doing as much as what they started. The elaborate pottery that defined early Lapita culture required clay, kilns, and sedentary lifestyles, all impractical for people turning increasingly to deep-sea fishing and long-distance voyaging. Instead, they mastered new technologies, lighter canoe designs, celestial navigation techniques, and stone tools better suited to rapid mobility. The silence in the archaeological record isn't a collapse, it's the sound of a society shedding its skin. The real breakthrough happened when these transformed descendants, now Proto-Polynesians, rediscovered the art of long-distance sailing. Around 300 CE, a new wave of expansion surged eastward, reaching Tahiti, Hawaii, and Rapa Nui. The Lapita Gap, it turns out, wasn't empty. It was a cocoon. During those centuries of seeming stillness, generations of navigators honed their craft, tested new routes, and adapted to ever more remote environments. The proof is in the language. Words for sea, wave, and sail, reconstructed from ancient Polynesian dialects, trace straight back to Lapita roots. Their legacy wasn't lost, it was distilled like seawater boiled down to salt. So why the pause? Imagine teaching someone to swim by throwing them into the deep end. The first Lapita voyages were staggering feats, but they relied on intervisible islands, hopping from one landmass to another while keeping the previous one in sight. Beyond Fiji and Samoa, the Pacific becomes a vast desert of waves. Venturing further required not just courage, but entirely new navigational sciences, reading star paths, wave patterns, and the flight of birds. That knowledge didn't emerge overnight. The Lapita Gap marks the incubation of a revolution, the moment when scattered settlers became true oceanic nomads, ready to cross distances that would daunt even modern sailors. What looks like disappearance is really a lesson in resilience. The Lapita didn't fail, they paused, adapted, and re-emerged as the ancestors of every Polynesian culture to come. Their story reminds us that progress isn't always a straight line. Sometimes it's a current circling back on itself, gathering strength before surging forward again. The quiet centuries between their pottery and Polynesia's sails weren't an ending, but a breath held before the greatest leap the Pacific had ever seen. Deep in the forests and savannas of what is now Nigeria, the Nok people sculpted a legacy that defies time. Terracotta figures so lifelike, so hauntingly expressive, they seem to whisper across 2,000 years. Between 500 BC and 200 CE, this Iron Age civilization thrived, mastering metalwork while much of Europe was still in the grip of the Stone Age. Their furnace technology was revolutionary, producing iron tools and weapons that would shape West Africa for centuries. Yet by the dawn of the 3rd century, their kilns fell cold, their villages emptied, and their extraordinary sculptures lay buried under layers of red earth, waiting for the chance touch of a farmer's hoe to bring them back to light. How does a culture so advanced simply vanish, leaving behind only fragments of its genius? The Nok's most enduring mystery is their terracotta. Unearthed figures depict men and women with elaborate hairstyles, coiled jewelry, and eyes wide with what might be sorrow or wisdom. Each face uniquely individual, unlike the stylized art of later African kingdoms. Some stand as sentinels, others kneel in quiet contemplation, their lips parted as if caught mid-speech. Found in fragments scattered over a 40,000 square mile area, these sculptures were never meant to be displayed intact. Archaeologists suspect they were ritually broken, perhaps as offerings to ancestors or spirits. But here's the puzzle. Despite their sophistication, the Nok left no monumental architecture, no written records, not even the foundations of permanent cities. Their world was one of scattered villages, bound together by shared artistry and technology, yet strangely ephemeral in the archaeological record. Iron holds another clue to their disappearance. The Nok were among sub-Saharan Africa's earliest ironworkers, smelting ore at temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius in cylindrical furnaces that dotted the landscape. Their blades and hoes would have given them an edge in farming and warfare, but metallurgy demands immense resources: forests cleared for charcoal, mines dug for ore. Soil samples from the region show signs of accelerated erosion around the time of their decline, hinting at deforestation and exhausted soils. Did the Nok's own ingenuity contribute to their undoing? Or was their fate tied to something even harder to trace, like shifting trade routes or the rise of rival kingdoms? Then there's the silence of the Sahel. Around 200 CE, the climate of West Africa entered a drier phase, pushing the boundaries of the Sahara southward. For a culture dependent on seasonal rains to nourish crops and replenish clay pits, this shift could have been catastrophic. Yet unlike the Maya or the Minoans, the Nok left no evidence of collapse, no burned villages, no mass graves. Their departure feels almost deliberate, like a slow fading into the landscape. Some scholars believe they didn't vanish at all, but dispersed, their knowledge absorbed by later cultures like the Yoruba and the Benin Empire. The Ife bronzes, crafted a millennium later, carry echoes of those ancient Nok faces, same elongated eyes, same quiet dignity. What remains is a paradox, a civilization advanced enough to forge iron and capture the human soul in clay, yet so transient that its very existence was forgotten until the 20th century. The Nok challenge our assumptions about what endures. Their sculptures, emerging from the earth like messages in a bottle, remind us that greatness isn't always measured in pyramids or palaces. Sometimes it's buried in fragments, waiting for the future to piece it back together. In the sun-scorched plains of Central Asia, where the Amu Darya River once nourished a civilization now known only by its modern name, the Oxus or Bactria Margiana archaeological complex, a society thrived in ways that still baffle archaeologists. Between 2200 and 1700 BCE, this Bronze Age culture built fortified cities with meticulously planned streets, crafted intricate silver vessels depicting gods and mythical beasts, and traded lapis lazuli as far as Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley. Their influence stretched from northern Afghanistan to Turkmenistan, a hub of commerce and culture in an otherwise harsh landscape. Yet by 1600 BCE, their cities lay abandoned, their art forgotten, their very name erased from history until modern excavations brought them back to light. What could have shattered a civilization so deeply connected to the lifeblood of its rivers and trade routes? One compelling theory points to the fickle nature of water itself. The Amu Darya, known in antiquity as the Oxus, is a river prone to violent shifts, its course altering dramatically over centuries as tectonic activity and silt buildup redirect its flow. Satellite imagery of the region reveals ancient riverbeds now dry, snaking through the desert like ghostly veins. At the site of Angkor the Khmer, once a bustling Oxus metropolis, archaeologists have found wells abruptly filled with sand and irrigation canals choked with sediment. This wasn't gradual decline, it was hydrological betrayal. A single catastrophic flood or a sudden diversion could have turned fertile fields into salt-encrusted wastelands within a generation. For a civilization that relied on precise irrigation to grow wheat and barley in an arid climate, such a disaster would have been existential. The Oxus people's mastery of water management, once their greatest strength, may have become their fatal vulnerability when the river simply walked away. Yet water alone doesn't explain the scorch marks on Angkor the Khmer's walls or the hastily buried hoards of silver and jewelry found at Togalok. Enter the nomads, the steppe warriors whose horseback raids would become the stuff of legend. Around the same time the Oxus cities fell, the Eurasian steppes birthed a new wave of migrants, the Andronovo culture, skilled metallurgists and fierce riders who may have seen the Oxus settlements as ripe for plunder. Unlike the Oxus people who lived in mud-brick houses and worshipped in ornate temples, the Andronovo were a people of the open sky, their graves filled with weapons and horse harnesses. At the Oxus site of Jokatan, archaeologists uncovered a layer of ash and arrowheads embedded in the citadel walls, telltale signs of a violent end. But was this outright conquest or something more complex? Some scholars argue the nomads didn't destroy the Oxus civilization so much as exploit its weakness, moving into abandoned cities and blending with the remaining population. Pottery styles from this period show a curious mix of Oxus motifs and Andronovo designs, suggesting a messy, protracted transition rather than a single catastrophic raid. Perhaps the most haunting clue lies in what the Oxus left behind, or rather, what they took with them. At the site of Sapali Teep, a storage room was found sealed with its contents intact: sacks of grain, stacks of pottery, even a child's toy. This isn't the aftermath of a panicked flight. It's the quiet closure of a place its inhabitants expected to return to. The Oxus people may not have vanished so much as dispersed, their knowledge and traditions carried westward by refugees who merged with other cultures. Some historians speculate that elements of Oxus religion, like their fire, rituals, and serpent deities, resurfaced centuries later in Zoroastrianism, the faith of Persia's mighty empires. Their legacy, though fragmented, refuses to die completely. The fall of the Oxus civilization isn't a simple story of invaders or environmental collapse. It's a tapestry of interconnected disasters: a river's betrayal, a steppe's restlessness, and a people's quiet resilience. Their cities now stand as mounds in the desert, their names lost to time, but their art whispers across millennia. In the delicate curve of a silver goblet or the geometric precision of a crumbling wall, we glimpse a world that understood both the fragility of water and the weight of history. They remind us that even the mightiest rivers can change course, and civilizations, like sand, are shaped by forces far beyond human control. In the rugged mountains of what's now New Mexico, the Mimbas people created pottery so stunning it seems to pulse with life. Bowls painted with darting jackrabbits, spiraling geometric patterns, and horned lizards so detailed you can almost hear them scuttle across the clay. For centuries, this ceramic tradition defined their identity, with each vessel serving as both art and artifact, buried with the dead or used in feasts that bound communities together. Then, around 1130 CE, something inexplicable happened. The kilns fell silent, the brushes stopped moving, the Mimbas didn't vanish, they walked away from their very soul. What could make a culture abandon its most sacred craft? The answer lies in the convergence of drought, upheaval, and a radical reinvention of what survival meant. Dendrochronology, the study of tree rings, paints a grim picture of the early 12th century. The Southwest was gripped by the same mega-drought that crippled Chaco Canyon, with rainfall dwindling to a trickle and temperatures soaring. At the Mimbas site of Galaz ruin, archaeologists found corn cobs shriveled to half their normal size, their kernels stunted by thirst. But here's the twist: the Mimbas didn't just starve, they adapted. Their later settlements shifted closer to reliable springs, and their architecture changed, with pit houses giving way to above-ground pueblos, a practical response to a drier world. Yet the pottery, their crown jewel, didn't follow suit. It simply stopped, not degraded, not simplified, abandoned. This wasn't a decline, it was a deliberate severing. The social dimension adds another layer. Mimbas society was intensely communal, with ceremonies centered around shared meals from those iconic bowls. When drought fractured trade networks and scattered populations, the very rituals that sustained their identity became impossible. At the Mattox ruin, excavations reveal a haunting scene: dozens of intact bowls ritually killed by puncturing their bases, then placed in graves as if to take their purpose into the afterlife. After 1130, no more bowls were made to replace them. Some scholars argue this wasn't collapse but conscious rejection, a people shedding the trappings of a world that no longer worked. Then there's the mystery of where they went. Unlike the ancestral Puebloans who left clear trails to new homelands, the Mimbas diaspora is harder to trace. Some likely merged with the emerging Salado culture to the west, blending their artistic flair with new traditions. Others may have joined Zuni or Hopi ancestors, carrying stories but not styles. The bold black and white designs of classic Mimbas pottery never reappear elsewhere, as if the knowledge was too sacred to pass on or too painful to remember. What lingers isn't just the beauty of those surviving bowls, but the eerie silence that followed. The Mimbas didn't just stop making pottery, they erased 1,000 years of aesthetic evolution in a generation. Their choice forces us to ask, when survival demands sacrifice, what parts of ourselves are we willing to leave behind? the answer, like their vanished brushes, lies buried in the dust of the Gila wilderness, waiting for the rain to return. From the towering pyramids of the Maya to the windswept ruins of the Mimbas, these 30 vanished civilizations remind us that history is written in whispers as much as shouts. Each empty plaza, each abandoned temple, each half-finished monument is a question mark carved in stone, proof that even the greatest societies can slip through the cracks of time. Whether swallowed by drought, shattered by war, or simply walked away from by people who chose a different path, their disappearances weave a tapestry of mystery that still haunts us today. Think about the echoes they left behind, those colossal Olmec heads staring silently from the jungle, the cryptic Indus Valley script we still can't read, the Minoan frescoes of leaping dolphins frozen mid-motion. These aren't just puzzles for archaeologists, they're mirrors. They force us to ask what holds a civilization together, what makes it fall apart, and when our own cities are someday reduced to rubble, what fragments will future explorers sift through, wondering who we were and why we vanished? The truth is, we'll never have all the answers. Maybe the Nabateans grew tired of their desert jewel. Maybe the Rapa Nui Islanders, watching their last tree fall, realized too late the cost of their ambition. Or maybe, just maybe, some of these cultures didn't disappear at all, but transformed into something new, their legacy carried in the bloodlines and traditions of people who still walk the earth today. That's the real magic of these mysteries. They don't just belong to textbooks, they belong to us. Every broken artifact, every faded mural is an invitation to wonder. So tell me, which of these vanishings chills you the most? Do you think the Minoans were doomed by Thera's fury, or was it something slower, subtler? Could the Cahokians have saved their city if they'd listened to the land? Drop your wildest theories in the comments below. After all, history isn't just about facts, it's about the stories we tell to fill the silence. And if you're craving more enigmas from the past, don't forget to hit subscribe. From lost cities to cryptic artifacts, we're just getting started on unraveling history's greatest riddles. Who knows, the next video might just feature your favorite mystery. Until then, keep questioning, keep exploring, and remember, the past isn't dead. It's not even past, it's waiting for us.